Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 752, and today's January 31st, 2025. Welcome back to the show. We have a lot to discuss today. First, I want to remind everyone to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And of course, you can find me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, where I post all my work. Those are the emails that I put out, the articles that I write, all the shows that I do, including Conflicts of Interest and the brand new Kyle Anzalone show, which you can subscribe to by following the YouTube page. It's the top link in the show notes page. All right, let's get into the news today. I got quite a few articles that I read to break down today, starting with this one. People in government supported Al-Qaeda. Gabbard in heated exchange with Senator Kelly. So during the confirmation hearing for National Director of National Intelligence, Senator Mark Kelly attacked nominee Tulsi Gabbard over her past criticisms of U.S. policy in Syria. Kelly asserted that Gabbard was repeating Russian talking points, while Tulsi argued that she was exposing U.S. support for Al-Qaeda. So during Tuesday's Senate committee session, Senator Kelly brought up Gabbard's frequent criticism of U.S. policy in Syria. He claimed Gabbard was repeating Russian and Iranian talking points by discussing the U.S. support for terror groups in Syria. Gabbard fired back at Kelly, explaining she viewed the policies of supporting terrorism as a personal affront. She said, "As someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of Al-Qaeda terrorist attack on 9/11 and committing myself and my life to doing what I could do to defeat these terrorists, I was shocked. It was a shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families, and my brothers and sisters in uniform. As a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual program that he had begun, really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping Al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow a regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East." Even though Gabbard's answer invoked her patriotism and call to service, Kelly again attacked the former congresswoman as parroting Russian and Iranian talking points. He said, "My concern has to do with the tendency to repeat Russian and Syrian, and even in some cases, I think we'll get to it in a closed session, Iranian information, and to discount what comes from our own intelligence community." Gabbard responded definitively, "Senator, every American deserves to know that people in our government were providing support to our sworn enemy Al-Qaeda. That should not be acceptable to anyone. Thank you." While Kelly may argue that Gabbard was repeating Russian and Iranian statements on the matter, legendary American journalist Seymour Hersh reported on the CIA program in 2014. He said, "The Obama administration has never publicly admitted to its role in creating what the CIA calls a rat line, a back channel highway into Syria. That rat line, authorized in early 2012, was used to funnel weapons and ammunition from Libya via southern Turkey and across the Syrian border to the opposition. Many of those in Syria who ultimately received the weapons were jihadists, some of them affiliated with Al-Qaeda. The CIA program to fund and arm the opposition groups began at least in 2012 and culminated in the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in December. Assad was removed from power by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, a designated foreign terrorist organization. HTS is led by Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, who recently declared himself president of Syria without holding an election. Jolani was a member of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who was moved to join the terror group after seeing the results of the 9/11 attack on the U.S. At the time of the Timber Sycamore program was started, it was well known to the Obama administration that the opposition was mainly comprised of jihadist fighters. At the time, Jake Sullivan, who was a State Department advisor to Hillary Clinton, sent an email to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton explaining Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. So, what Gabbard did during that confirmation hearing by really, continuing to harp on this issue was really important. And while, some of her statements and some of her backtracking from her previous positions is disappointing, it's good that she was still willing to stand up strong on this particular issue. All right, next up here, Trump orders migrant detention facility at Guantanamo Bay to operate at full capacity. So I wrote this one for the Institute on the 30th. President Donald Trump is preparing a migrant processing facility in the U.S. occupied Cuba to house as many as 30,000 migrants illegally living in the U.S. On the campaign trail, Trump made immigration a central issue, pledging to expel people from the U.S. with an emphasis on convicted criminals. On Wednesday, President Trump signed an executive order to make it possible to send some of those people to a migrant detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The order says, I hereby direct the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security to take all appropriate actions to expand the Migrant Operations Center at Naval Station Guantanamo Bay to full capacity to provide additional detention space for high-priority criminal aliens unlawfully present in the United States. The migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay is separate from the CIA torture prison that was established during the George W. Bush presidency. However, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem made statements that draw parallels between the facilities. So she told CNN there might be some resources that could be established for the, quote, worst of the worst at Guantanamo Bay, and that is something that he is evaluating along with our team at the Department of Homeland Security. So during the Bush administration, Americans were regularly told not to worry about the unconstitutional torture taking place at the Gitmo prison, as the detainees were the, quote, worst of the worst. And this was the phrase, worst of the worst, that the Bush administration was using over and over and over again, even after it was exposed, the Bush administration was over. They were still saying, you can't close the base, you can't let the people out because they're all the worst of the worst. So, Kristi Noem using that phrase, it has to be a direct parallel and to, tie these two together. So Trump defended his executive order, saying most people don't even know about it, which is true. Most people don't, when they think of Gitmo, they only think of the torture prison there, and not that there is this facility with 30,000 beds. Now, my understanding is that it's probably not equipped and will take quite a lot of, additional staff and supplies and things like that to get this facility up to where it could hold 30,000 people. Now, I'm assuming they could start sending people to Gitmo before they have all 30,000 beds ready. So it's quite possible that people start ending up here, before, in the coming weeks or something like that. At the same time, people are saying that, oh, this is Trump's, kind of unique evil. My understanding is this center has been used before, and that the Biden administration even considered using it as a place to store and send the Haitian migrants that were arriving in the U.S. So back to Trump's quote, he says, we had 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. This will double our capacity immediately. Today's signing brings us one step closer to eradicating the scourge of migrant crime in our communities once and for all. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel blasted the Trump decision to expand the facility that is on Cuban-occupied soil. He said, in an act of brutality, the new U.S. government announces the imprisonment at the Guantanamo naval base located in illegally occupied territory of Cuba of thousands of migrants that it forcibly expels and will place them next to the well-known prison of torture and illegal detention. And he wrote that on X. So while Trump faced stiff political resistance attempting to enforce his hardline immigration policies during his first administration, the president appears to have some support from across the aisle this time around. One of the first pieces of legislation passed by the new Congress was the Larkin-Riley Act, which requires the detention of illegal immigrants charged with certain crimes. And so my guess is that that law is probably going to be somewhat important to Trump being able to send these people to Gitmo. Next up here, Russia says Ukrainian drone targeted nuclear power plant. I wrote this one for the Institute on the 29th. Ukraine launched over 100 drones targeting Russian energy infrastructure. One of those drones, one Russian official said that a nuclear power plant was among the targets. So according to the Russian Defense Ministry, overnight Tuesday, its forces downed more than 100 Ukrainian drones. The UAVs targeted Russian energy infrastructure over a widespread area. One of those drones was down in the Smolnek region of Russia near a nuclear facility. The governor said, according to preliminary information, one of the drones was shot down during an attempt to strike a nuclear power facility. There was no casualties or damage. In the Belgorod region, Russian authorities reported a drone killed a woman and her 2-year-old child. Recently, Kiev has stepped up its drone strikes in Russia. Earlier this month, Ukraine launched its largest drone and missile barrage of the war. Among the targets was the Turk Stream pipeline, which transports gas from Russia to Turkey. Moscow typically responds to Ukrainian attacks inside Russia by bombing cities and infrastructure. Following a Ukrainian drone attack in Russia in December, President Putin said, "Whoever and however tries to destroy something in our country, he will face destruction many times larger in his own country and will regret its attempt to do that in our country." Additionally, the Kremlin often blames Washington for its role in supplying Kiev with the necessary arms, funding, and intelligence to conduct attacks inside of Russia. Near the end of the Biden administration, an official spoke with the New York Times and confirmed Washington had given Kiev at least $1.5 billion to develop a domestic drone program. The Times explained, U.S. officials said they had made big investments that helped Ukraine start and expand its production of drones as it battled Russia's larger and better equipped army. In October, the Times reported that President Biden sent Kiev $800 million to buy long-range drones from Ukrainian arms makers. And so this is why Russia blames U.S. so much for all of this. All right, next up here, Ukrainian media outlet leaks alleged plan of Trump's to end the Ukraine war. So this one from Dave DeCamp, January 29th, antiwar.com. So Dave writes, the Ukrainian news outlet Strana has reported leaked details of President Trump's alleged plan to end the war in Ukraine. According to Newsweek, which said it couldn't verify the details were accurate, the plan starts with holding a phone call between Trump and Putin in late January or early February, followed by meetings with both Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky in February or March. The leaked plan calls for a ceasefire to be declared by Easter, which falls on April 20th. The truce would involve Ukraine withdrawing troops from Russia's Kursk Oblast. Once the ceasefire comes into effect, a peace conference will begin, hammering out the details of the lasting agreement. The plan calls for the deal to be reached by May 9th. Once the details of the agreement are released, Ukraine will be instructed to end martial law and mobilization. That would mean Zelensky could lose his power since his presidential term expired in May 2024, and he used martial law to justify not holding new elections. The plan would require allowing parties who oppose continuing the war with Russia to run for office. Some of the proposed ideas under the plan for a Russian-Ukraine peace deal include barring Ukraine from joining NATO, an agreement for Ukraine to join the European Union by 2023, and the EU facilitating Ukraine's reconstruction. Ukraine would also be able to keep its military and continue receiving military aid from the US, which could be a non-starter for Moscow. Now, look, there may be some room for negotiations on this point from the Russian perspective. If, say, the U.S. wants to just send small arms and ammunition to Ukraine, that might be something that Putin is willing to concede on in order to end this conflict. If we're talking about drones and long-range missiles, artillery shells, cluster munitions, F-16s, Abrams tanks, armored personnel carriers, my guess is that Russia is going to draw, the line fairly low in what Ukraine is able to import from particularly NATO countries. So the proposal would also require Ukraine to cede the territory Russia has captured. Ukraine would have to refuse military and diplomatic attempts to return the occupied territories and officially recognize the sovereignty of the Russian Federation over them. That's a good sign and a good step. If they're willing to make those concessions, that might be enough of uh, a starting point for the Russian side of all of this, that they're willing to make some compromises on other points, like how many weapons will be allowed into Ukraine. So Zelensky's office has denied that the peace plan is authentic, although other media reports have said that Trump tasked his envoy for the conflict, Keith Kellogg, with ending the war within the first 100 days of the Trump administration. If the plan is legitimate, leaking it could have been an attempt to sabotage it from moving forward. And that was kind of my interpretation when I read this article, was that the Ukrainian government likely leaked this in order to get it out there to undermine the plan, to generate some resistance against it. All right. Next up, this one I wrote for the Institute on January 29th. There is no balance in this relationship. Knesset debates Israeli reliance on U.S. aid. So members of the Israeli Knesset held a session debating Tel Aviv's reliance on aid from Washington. The U.S. sends Israel at least $3.8 billion in annual military assistance, and in 2024, the aid surged to over $20 billion. The Knesset members debated with officials and experts about Tel Aviv's dependence on Washington for weapons and funding to operate its military. So Gideon Israel, the president of the Jerusalem Washington Center, told the committee, "Isn't it strange that within 24 hours of October 7th, we were asking for aid from the U.S.? We couldn't fight the war on our own. Not 3 weeks passed and we are already had a package of requests for $15 billion of aid." He added, "This tendency to beg where not a moment goes by and we are already asking for help from the U.S. is an Israeli quality that has existed for 50 years, and no one thinks, wait a minute, this needs to be reevaluated." And so he's arguing that, this is an unacceptable amount of reliance that Israel has on Washington. Dor Chopra, head of the Israeli Foreign Ministry's North American Bureau, noted, "The fact that we have partnership with the U.S. doesn't mean that the sides are even. We get a lot of help in defense and diplomacy. So there is no balance in this relationship." He's saying there's no balance. This is what an Israeli official is telling the Knesset. There is no balance in this relationship, which means Israel takes everything from the U.S. and the U.S. gets nothing in return. Israel gives the U.S. nothing except a larger terrorism problem, a less stable Middle East to deal with. Now, I don't know if he would go as far to make that point with me, but certainly at least he understands which way the aid is flowing. In 2016, President Obama signed a memorandum of understanding with Israel, promising Tel Aviv $3.8 billion in military aid every year. Following the October 7th attack, assistance to Israel increased to $22 billion. Gideon explained that there are no free lunches, and Washington can use the aid to force Tel Aviv to make certain decisions. However, during Israel's 15-month-long onslaught in Gaza, the Biden administration refused to leverage military support to force Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to halt military operations and allow aid to reach the starving Palestinian people. Now, Biden did, and one PR stunt, hold up a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel that Trump has now authorized and has sent to Israel. So I think we see once again, we just don't have any leadership in Washington who's willing to take, there's no balance in the relationship, right? So if we wanted to leverage to rebalance this relationship, even, make it a 25-75 split or something like that, we hold up some weapon shipments to rein the Israelis in, but we're not willing to do that. So Raphael Ben-Levi, a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for Zionist Strategy and National Security, told the Knesset that the U.S. has become part of the central policy considerations of Israel in the last 30 years, but noted that Washington tended to use aid as a carrot and not a stick. Yoram Itiger, a former Israeli diplomat, argued that Tel Aviv should reframe the way it discusses U.S. aid. Rather than be grateful to the U.S. for the support, Tel Aviv should tell Washington that no American investment brings in a greater return than Israel. We are the flagship store of the American defense industry. When on October 26, 2024, there was an Israeli Air Force operation and 100 American-made planes flew over Iran, this immediately promoted the American industry sales. We are a laboratory in battle conditions. And so this was maybe the most wild statement to me of the entire Knesset session that I read, where they're actually saying that rather than say, oh, you sent us $22 billion in aid, allowing us to wage this genocide in Gaza that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. They wouldn't have been able to carry out all these military attacks against Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen. They couldn't do any of that. Netanyahu says we're fighting a 7-front war. They couldn't fight that 7-front war without U.S. military support. But rather than be grateful for that, rather than say, oh, thank you so much to the Americans for your help, they're saying that we should present this as the Americans are lucky that we are here to take their money, to take their weapons and use them because we think that it's a good show of force, a good show of the capabilities of the American weapon systems. I think that this is probably the opposite case, especially when you look at what's happened in Gaza, where, the American warplanes, American bombs are now just directly tied to a genocide. In the long run, this may actually hurt America's ability to sell weapons around the globe. And not that that benefits the American people in any way whatsoever, right? That our weapons are used around our globe or something like that. And worse off, it creates a huge amount of anti-American sentiment across the Middle East, across the world. And so it in no way helps the American people, even if it does help some defense contractors in Washington. So the former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor, Chuck Furlich, explained that American support for Israel stretches beyond aid and losing the assistance could jeopardize the wider relationship. He noted the diplomatic umbrella that Tel Aviv receives from Washington. He is likely referring to the U.S. using its veto at the United Nations Security Council to prevent the body from adopting any resolutions critical of Israel or punishing Tel Aviv for the genocide in Gaza. He went on to say, maybe, but it's much less safe existence and with much less economic and social welfare. It's a reality that no one wants to return to the security and economic level of the 1970s. And so he's saying that, maybe if we lost the aid, it would be okay. But we have great social welfare programs in Israel. If we had to fund our own war, 70% of Israeli military actions during the first year were paid for by the United States of America. So imagine if they had to fund their own war. Could they have free healthcare, free education, all these other social welfare programs that they have in Israel? No, they couldn't. And so the United States government is effectively paying for that. So at present, Israel maintains significant influence in Washington. However, younger Americans increasingly view the Palestinians more sympathetically, are against Washington's support for Tel Aviv, and half of young Americans believe Israel's war in Gaza to be a genocide. And so there may be a generational time bomb on this U.S.-Israeli relationship, and we can only hope that's the case. All right, next up here, this one from Day to Camp. Israeli forces have killed more than 80 Palestinians in Gaza since the ceasefire came into effect, which of course is far more than the hostages that have been released. So since the Gaza ceasefire went into effect on January 19th, Israeli forces had killed more than 80 Palestinians across the Strip. Dr. Zahir al-Wahaldi, director of information for the Gaza Health Ministry, told Dropsite News that 49 of the dead were likely killed by Israeli troops in the southern city of Rafah, where many bodies remain buried beneath the rubble. He also said that since January 19th, 470 bodies have been recovered from the rubble, including 115 in Rafah. He said, we need caterpillars and bulldozers to clear up the wreckage and recover the corpses. People are getting back to literally nothing. Rafah is destroyed and the killing and bombings continue there. The health ministry said Wednesday in its daily update that Gaza's hospitals received another 63 bodies over the previous 24-hour period. 59 bodies were recovered from the rubble. 2 Palestinians died of previously sustained wounds, and 2 more were killed by Israeli forces in the past day. In several instances, the Israeli military claimed it opened fire on Palestinians who posed what they said was a threat to Israeli troops on the ground, but the IDF shot and killed an unarmed contractor who was dressed in civilian clothing simply because he was walking towards Israeli troops, demonstrating the free rein Israeli soldiers have to fire on civilians. Throughout the genocidal war in Gaza, Israeli troops have killed unarmed civilians and counted them as terrorists, a practice that was reported on by the Israeli military. Gaza's health ministry said the latest violence and recovered bodies have brought the death toll since October of 2023 to 47,417, a number that is considered a significant undercount. A study published by The Lancet said the true death toll as of October of 2024 was likely over 70,000, which only includes Palestinians killed by violence, not indirect deaths caused by the U.S.-backed Israeli siege. And typically in war zones, we see the indirect deaths, those caused by the siege and other ways, to actually be more lethal than the fighting. And so the number of dead is likely well over 100,000 in this conflict. All right, next up here, Hamas releases 3 Israeli hostage and 5 Thai nationals. So on Thursday, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad released 3 more Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals who were captured during the October 7th attack in exchange for freeing 110 Palestinians from Israeli jails. The first Israeli hostage to be released, Agram Berger, a 20-year-old female soldier, was handed over to the Red Cross by Hamas in northern Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp, which had been completely destroyed by the Israeli military. Later, Hamas and PIJ militants released a female captive, Arbel Yahard, who's 29, and Gadi Morse, an 80-year-old man, and then 5 Thai nationals in the southern city of Khan Yunis. The handover to the Red Cross was done in front of the destroyed home of Hamas's slain leader, Sinwar. The release of the 7 hostages in Khan Yunis drew a big crowd, and footage showed the captives surrounded by Hamas and PIJ militants who were pushing through the crowd as they brought them to the Red Cross officials. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed the release of Palestinians from jail over what he called horrific scenes from Gaza, but Israel later freed the Palestinians after the Israeli hostages reunited with their families. The 5 Thai nationals met with government officials and are on their way home to Thailand. They were working on farms in southern Israel when they were captured by Palestinian militants on October 7th. According to CNN, the Hamas prisoner media office said the 110 Palestinians set to be released on Thursday included 30 children, 32 people who were sentenced to life, and 48 that were given high sentences. Some of the prisoners were deported upon their release, and families have been prevented from traveling to meet them. Israel has been trying to prevent Palestinians from celebrating the prisoner release, and according to the Middle East Eye, Israeli forces opened fire on a crowd of Palestinians near a prison in West Bank, injuring at least 12. The Israeli military also dropped threatening leaflets on Gaza, warning against celebrations. Under the ceasefire deal, Hamas and Israel are supposed to begin negotiations on the second phase in the coming days. The ceasefire is incredibly fragile as Israel has killed more than 80 Palestinians in Gaza since it came into effect in January 19th, so a little under 2 weeks. And Israeli officials are threatening to restart the genocidal war. Netanyahu has claimed that he has a guarantee from President Trump to restart military operations if he chooses to do so. So next up, let's talk about Trump because he made some really disturbing statements. Trump insists Egypt and Jordan will take Palestinians from Gaza. So Trump on Thursday insisted that Jordan and Egypt will take Palestinian refugees from Gaza, despite fierce objections from the 2 Arab nations. Trump's recent suggestion to clean out Gaza of its Palestinian population and send them to Jordan and Egypt raised fears that the U.S. may support ethnic cleansing of the territory, but his idea was met with quick rejection from Jordan and the Egyptian governments and the wider Arab world. So it's important here that, Trump floated it. Now, Trump says a lot of things, right? And this is one of the things about Trump. He says a lot of good things, a lot of bad things. He just says a lot of things. Sometimes he'll say something that is absolutely outrageous or even sensible, and it'll just never come up again. And so when he said that we're going to send the Palestinians to Jordan or Egypt, one hoped that this was something that comes up, but then doesn't come up again. But that's not what's going on here. It does seem like this is something that Trump is seriously thinking about. When asked on Thursday about the Egyptian and the Jordanian resistance to his proposal, Trump said, "They will do it. They will do it. They're going to do it. Okay. We do a lot for them. They're going to do it." Trump's calls to remove Palestinians from Gaza were welcomed by more hardline elements of the Israeli government, who are openly in favor of ethnic cleansing and the establishment of Jewish settlements in Gaza. This includes Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who said he is working to make Trump's vision of reality. Smotrich and others framed their desire for ethnic cleansing as voluntary migration, but the Israeli military campaign has left most of Gaza uninhabitable. Some media reports said that the Trump administration is discussing the idea of temporarily locating Gaza residents during the reconstruction, but many would likely be hesitant to leave over fears that Israel wouldn't let them back in. And what happens if the Palestinian people don't want to go? Are you going to march them out of there at a barrel of a gun? What if they still refuse? What if all they have is rots, but they say, "This is my home. I will not be marched out of here." And they throw, "Are you just going to kill them?" Because that seems like the likely solution here is that the Palestinians will refuse to leave. Look at that. They are celebrating. And, I not much to celebrate, but they are celebrating on the rubble of that was once their home now. That, they're happy that they were able to return to what was once their home. And so if they're happy to be upon their pile of rubble, they're not going to then be marched out of it again. They're going to stay there in their homes. And so I'm worried that they're just going to start killing them. So Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff said Thursday that there is almost nothing left of Gaza, comments he made after visiting the Israeli-controlled Nazarene corridor and observing the destruction from a helicopter. Witkoff told Axios, "People are moving north to go back to their homes to see what happened and turn around and leave. There's no water, there's no electricity. It's just stunning how much damage occurred there." Witkoff, a real estate investor from New York, said he thinks reconstruction in Gaza will take 10 to 15 years. Witkoff added that the demolition and removal of rubble would take 5 years. There is nothing left standing. Many unexploded ordnance. It's not safe to walk there. It's very dangerous. I wouldn't have known this without going in there and inspecting. Now, unfortunately, he wasn't so appalled by this and what Israel did that he's just saying that, "Oh, we're going to force the Israelis to rebuild the Gaza Strip and to stop bombing the place into smithereens." It seems that he is in line with the hardline elements of the Israeli administration. So this one from Day to Camp, January 30th, Israel's Smotrich praises Trump administration after meeting with Witkoff. So Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich praised the Trump administration on Thursday after he met with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy for the Middle East. Witkoff has been pushing for a full implementation of the Gaza ceasefire deal, an idea strongly opposed by Smotrich, who not only wants the genocide war to be restarted, but wants an escalation with the goal of the gradual takeover of the entire Gaza Strip. Despite these two having seemingly opposite ideas, Smotrich appeared happy to be with how the meeting went. We discussed the issues at hand, the courageous relationship and the close cooperation between Israel and the United States, a relationship that is now strengthening dramatically with President Trump. We discussed the great importance of the return of the hostages and the complete victory for the stake of strengthening the security of the state of Israel. Smotrich said they also discussed the new outside-the-box thinking that the U.S. is promoting to enable the elimination of the forces of evil and the promotion of peace through strength in the Middle East and in general. Smotrich could be referring to Trump's calls to clean out Gaza and its Palestinian population and send them to Jordan or Egypt. So That Smotrich is happy here is not a good sign for the Palestinian people or peace. All right, next up here, this one from Jason Ditz, January 30th. Israeli ceasefire violations continue. Lebanese fear IDF troops will remain past deadline. So the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon continues, as does Israel's flouting of the ceasefire. At least 11 violations of the ceasefire have been reported in the past 24 hours, including airstrikes, drone strikes, and gunfire against Lebanese civilians. Drone strikes were reported on a house in the village in southern Lebanon. The house had already been effectively destroyed by Israeli forces, and there is no report of any casualties in today's strike. It is now evident why Israel attacked a home that was already destroyed. A more unusual aggression occurred in Tal Nahalis Thursday morning when Israeli forces raided and set fire to a poultry farm. This incident was reported by multiple sources, and Israel has not commented or offered an explanation for why the farm was burned. While no casualties have been reported at either the farm or the drone strike, the same can't be said of the Israeli gunfire against civilians. At least 36 were reported wounded on Tuesday alone, with more casualties reported before and after them. In addition to the incidents, the Israeli Air Force attacked an engineering truck it claimed was owned by Hezbollah, and 3 Turkish nationals were killed along the border, allegedly trying to cross into Israel. Israel also reported shooting down a Hezbollah surveillance drone, though to be trying to enter Israeli airspace. Although Israel has committed well over 1,000 ceasefire violations, it presented the presumptive plans of this unarmed drone as a major ceasefire violation by Hezbollah. Israel has reportedly planning attacks on asserted Hezbollah compounds in the outskirts of multiple southern Lebanese towns. The operations are focused around the Galilee Panhandle. These new planned attacks, together with yesterday's announcement that the IDF won't be withdrawing until it's satisfied of the Lebanese military control of the area, are raising concerns that Israel plans to occupy the broader areas of Lebanon for a longer time. Per the ceasefire, Israel was supposed to withdraw from Lebanon within 60 days, a period that expired Monday morning. The U.S. and Israel, however, extended the ceasefire deadline and thus the occupation until February 18th. But will Israel withdraw by February 18th? It's not clear. The IDF comments certainly suggest it's not in any rush to leave. Beyond the systematic burning of civilian homes in southern Lebanon and now poultry farms as well, Israeli troops are installing heavy surveillance equipment at strategic Lebanese hilltop locations and indicating an intention to stay longer than a few weeks. All right, last story here today. Israel says it will occupy southern Syria indefinitely. This one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on January 28th. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Tuesday that Israel will indefinitely occupy areas of southern Syria it captured after the regime change in Damascus that ousted former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Katz made the comments while visiting Israeli troops on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, which is located on the Syria-Lebanon border. The IDF will remain at the summit of Hermon and the security zone indefinitely to ensure the secure of the communities of the Golan Heights and the north and all the residents of Israel. Israel has occupied the Golan Heights since 1967 and annexed the Syrian territory in 1981, a move not recognized by any country until the Trump administration did so in 2019. Israel began its land grab in Syria by capturing the buffer zone between the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and the rest of Syria that was patrolled by UN peacekeepers. The invading Israeli forces have also captured several towns in Syria's Quneitra governance. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu celebrated and took credit for the overthrow of Assad since he was an ally of Iran and Hezbollah. But Israel has also used the takeover of Syria by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, to invade and capture more land in the south. Israel also launched a massive airstrikes in Syria to destroy military equipment. Katz said, "We will not allow hostile forces to establish themselves in the security zone in southern Syria. We will act against any threat. We will not be dependent on others for our security." And so concerning that, Israel is not only about to remove the Palestinians and seize Gaza, possibly the West Bank, but also a chunk of southern Lebanon and southern Syria. All right, everybody, that will do it for the show this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in and giving me your support, not only to Conflicts of Interest, but to the Kyle Anzalone Show, all the articles I write. Anybody who likes and shares my articles, the shows, it really does help get it out there to more people. I really do appreciate it. So if everybody could keep doing that, it will help out this show, and we'll be back with another episode soon.